Why has Victoria performed so badly compared to the rest of the country? How has Victoria lost control of a virus the rest of the country has quelled? Hasn't there been a national response? Haven't the measures been similar across the country? Weren't Victoria's lockdown measures the toughest in the land? Remember Daniel Andrews solemnly warning that playing golf could cost people their lives? Remember schools being shut early and staying shut longer in Victoria? Remember people being fined for fishing in Victoria? Incredibly, the Victorian Premier has tried to blame mainstream Victorians.
I think a sense of complacency has crept into us as we let our frustrations get the better of us. I think that each of us knows someone who has not been following the rules as well as they should have. I think each of us know that we've got no choice but to take these very, very difficult steps.
The issue here, the issue Andrews wants to duck, is the country's #1 weapon against the pandemic. Australia's biggest advantage in the coronavirus pandemic has been our island status. And the most important decision taken was the federal government's bold move to ban overseas visitors and push all people returning from overseas into compulsory quarantine. Until now, until we've seen these cases of Victorian community transmissions, these overseas returns have been the prime source of the disease in this country, and they've been stopped dead in quarantine, at least in the other states, but not in Victoria. Under Daniel Andrews in Victoria, quarantine has been bungled. It's proven to be a catastrophic stuff-up. This has been a quarantine regime that, instead of stopping infections, has spread them. And now it's going to cost Victorians and the rest of the country dearly. Insiders say 2 other Victorian errors have exacerbated the situation. Their contract tracing has not been up to the standard of the other states. And their soft approach to the protests last month, of course, gave the wrong signal to the community. Yes, if there's been any slackness, any complacency from Victorians, it's come about because Daniel Andrews and his government were so weak in allowing those protests. People probably figured if it's OK for protesters to hang out, then why not the rest of us? Both of those criticisms are fair, and contact tracing is a massively important task now. But the key problem here, the central failing, was the bungling of quarantine. The most important task in this whole national pandemic response, the most important task for the medical and economic health of the nation, was outsourced to poorly trained private security firms who were not fit for purpose. The other states didn't do that. But questioned on this issue, the Premier today just deferred to a judicial inquiry that's already underway.
No one has moved away from accepting responsibility on that basis. But as you know, Rich, we've got a process and we'll let that run its course.
This is weak. Andrews is dodging his core failing, refusing to accept his share of the blame or explain his government's actions. But at the same time, he's been chastising Victorians, blaming them for what's happened. Now the nation's second largest city is in lockdown again for 6 weeks. It's gone back into lockdown after emerging from it in the past few weeks. Most of its school kids are going to miss at least another week of schooling. And now, surrounded by hard borders, Victorians have to put up with headlines like this in Sydney's Daily Telegraph, while South Australians also are keeping the Vics at bay as the whole state now is isolated from the rest of the country. Victorians and most Australians were quite rightly critical of New South Wales and its government for the Ruby Princess stuff-up that saw infected people spread across the country. Now a whole state has let down the nation with abysmal quarantine procedures. Once again, they might be using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, but the bright news is that they might have gotten onto this early enough. They should be able to get this back under control. The Victorians are going to have to pay a high price for 6 weeks. A price that was entirely unnecessary.